You know, we've all seen a million great camera reviews, you know. I mean, when you need a new camera, there is a plethora, certainly not a shortage, of a million camera reviews out there that are awesome, you know. Every brand, every model, you know, all these amazing filmmakers making these like commercials and short films about these cameras and giving you examples of how to use them, and like there's so much good stuff out there, you know. And you know, it's really kind of difficult to choose what your favorite camera might be, you know, because they're all so good. They all can do the job. Like if you can't make good video or good filmmaking from any of these cameras, you really need to look at yourself. Like it's not the camera, you know. I mean, all these videos are talking about how many stops of dynamic range, how many stops of IBIS, you know, stabilization, autofocus, color science, you know, dual native ISO, all that kind of stuff, you know. Like what lenses are available for this particular camera brand, you know, what the mount is important. I mean, I think that in many cases, you're going to choose your camera based on the person giving the review. You know, like you're going to feel some kind of personal connection to this person. You're going to be like, I want whatever that person's using, that's what I want, you know. Or you might see a certain brand being, you know, put out by a whole bunch of people. You know, like a new camera comes out and all of a sudden this embargo and a million influencers are talking about the same camera, and you're like, I want to be a part of that community, you know. You might want to do it that way, you know, as if buying a certain brand or style of a camera is making you a part of a community. It's really not, but it does kind of feel that way. So I understand that, you know. But the bottom line is all of these camera reviews are exactly the same, you know. They're just giving you specs. They're just showing you the way it looks. They're showing you where the buttons are. They're telling you, you know, how customizable it is, whether it's weather sealed or not, you know, stuff like that. And because of the technology and how it's been moving, pretty much every camera is amazing. I mean, you can't go wrong with any of these cameras. But I saw a camera review the other day that, in my opinion, was the greatest camera review I have ever seen. Like, to me, the best camera review in the history of the world. It was the perfect camera review. It actually made me want to buy this camera, even though I have no desire to buy a new camera. I'm shooting with the Panasonic S5, the original. People think I have a dinosaur. It's got crappy autofocus. I don't use autofocus. I don't care. I love this camera so much. I love the image that it puts out. I love how it feels to use it, you know, like I'm used to it. It's my camera, you know. I know this thing like the back of my hand. It just gets out of my way. It's like a part of my body, you know. I can tell stories with this camera. It's like, it's my brain, it's my heart, it's my soul. It just, you know, it's a tool that works for me, you know. And at the moment I'm shooting with a Minolta 50mm f1.4 Rokkor lens, which is an old vintage lens. I love shooting with vintage lenses on this camera, and I love shooting anamorphic. And so you really can't tell me anything when it comes to cameras, you know, because I have a camera that's like, I think it came out in 2017 or something like that. I don't know when it came out. You know, maybe it came out in 2019. You know, maybe the GH5 came out in 2017. I don't know. I just know it didn't come out 20 minutes ago, like, you know, all these cameras that people need to buy immediately as soon as it comes out. The S5 II, the S5 IIX, the FX30, you know, like people need to buy cameras immediately when they come out, you know, because these exciting commercials show up. But if you're savvy and if you're smart, after a while you realize all these are the same, you know. It's really just different prices. Like when you think about it, you can get a Panasonic S5 II or an S5 IIX for like less than $2,000, you know, or somewhere between $1,700 and $2,200. You can get an FX30 for $1,500, you know, Sony FX30. Like these are bona fide cinema cameras, really. Like you can do movies with these. You can make a Netflix film, you know. And, you know, but you can also spend $4,000 and get an FX3, right? Or a, you know, A7S3. And then you're going to have to spend another $1,500 on lenses, you know, like it's really just a matter of price, because all of these cameras pretty much do the same thing. And so what am I even talking about? What I'm talking about is I saw this video And I don't remember his name offhand, but I'm going to put it on the screen here. And I'm going to link this video in the description because I think everybody should watch this video. Because this guy, this filmmaker, this documentarian, he was working on a documentary in Ukraine in the middle of the war, getting bombed around him. Like, you know, he was talking about how we know when the bombs are coming because these lights come over us first from these planes. And like, I can't even describe it. But I was like, wow, this dude is in the middle of a war. And he decided, you know what? I'm going to stop for a minute and I'm going to do a review of the Panasonic GH7 because I got some valuable information here that might help other filmmakers and I want to share it. So let me take a break from the war and make this, you know, like basically quick commercial or, you know, review of the GH7. Now, the GH7 is kind of an interesting camera to me because I have my backup camera is a GH5. So I also have worked with a micro four thirds camera because the GH7 and the GH5 are micro four thirds. And if you don't know what that means, it just means it's a smaller sensor and it's got a crop factor and it's got some, in some people's eyes, it's got some limitations. But to other people, it's got advantages. It just depends on what you're shooting. So I love the GH5. Like, I don't know what it is about that camera, but, you know, I use this cheap little lens on it, a Ttartisan 17mm f1.4. It cost me $75 brand new on Amazon. And I'm telling you, it looks like a vintage lens. It's incredible. It's like, it's crazy. It's built really well. It's all metal. You know, you know, focusing ring is like so smooth and in a spot on the camera where it's easy to pull focus while you're shooting. The aperture ring has good clicks on it, so it's not going to move accidentally. Like, it's a beautiful lens and it looks great. And like I said, everything I shoot with the GH5 looks like a movie. And I don't know what it is, I don't know why, but it's just an incredible camera. And the GH5, legendary camera, right? 4K 60, unlimited recording in 4K. It's got more codecs than the S5, which I use here. I mean, in many ways, it's a more capable camera than the S5, even though the S5 is full frame. And I'll explain to you the difference to me in a minute. But anyway, I've been interested in the GH7 because I love the GH5. And the GH7 has the new autofocus, you know, which I don't really care. I don't use autofocus, but, you know, I do understand the advantages of it. And if I had amazing, reliable autofocus, I'm sure I would make use of it, you know. But there are other things that I really like about the GH7 that are interesting to me as well, you know. And so I wanted to watch this review. And I just thought, you know, while I was watching it, I was thinking to myself, wow, this guy has never even mentioned a spec, you know, no specifications. He's not talking about anything about dynamic range or color science or anything like that. He's just simply talking about how this camera is the perfect tool for his job, you know? And he said something that was like a real kind of, something that I knew, but it like turned a light bulb on in my head. You know, he said, listen, after explaining why the camera was good for him, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, you should watch the video because I think it's a really great example of somebody out there doing the real work and recommending a camera, which is like, you can't really, it's like indisputable that this is a great review because he's out there in the middle of a war. I keep saying that, but he's in the middle, he's risking his life talking about this camera. And he loved it because it's weather sealed, it's built like a tank, and this is the part that really got me. He said, I would highly recommend a micro four thirds camera, this GH7, to anybody shooting outdoors all the time. Like if your gig is finding you outdoors, I would highly recommend this camera because if you're indoors in a studio or if you're shooting a movie, maybe it's not the best because it's harder for you to make up for the crop factor, right? Because if you're outdoors, it's much easier to move around, you know, to get the framing that you want, to get the proper composition, to keep everything consistent that you've been doing. But if you're indoors, it's more of a challenge. Not to mention, full frame camera allows more light into the lens, into the sensor. And so that's obviously better for indoors, you know. I mean, it could be nighttime outdoors too, and so that is a disadvantage with Micro Four Thirds. But he also addressed that and said, look, the ISO capability on this camera, the low light capability is amazing. You know, this sensor deals with low light very well. However, full frame is just by, you know, it's factual that full frame allows more light into the sensor. And so that's an advantage. And you know, even though I've been interested in the GH7, I've been thinking, I don't know if I want to leave full frame. Now, first of all, I have anamorphic lenses for this camera and my S5. And so if I switch to Micro Four Thirds for my professional work, I would have to get new lenses, you know, get Micro Four Thirds lenses, because I can't adapt L mount, which is Lumix, Panasonic, full frame. I can't adapt that to my Micro Four Thirds, which is kind of messed up because it's the same company. Like with Sony, you can use any lens with any APS-C or full frame camera. Lumix, if you use Micro Four Thirds, you can't use their full frame lenses. And if you're full frame, you can't use the Micro Four Thirds lenses, and that's a drag, you know? Because then if you have both cameras, you got to have separate sets of lenses. And if you switch over, you got to get rid of one set and buy a new set for the new, you know, the new camera that you're working with. But that was like, you know, kind of an epiphany for me. Like, you know, I couldn't really pinpoint why I didn't want to just move to the GH7, because it was a more modern camera and it had things that my camera didn't have. It had unlimited recording. It had recording to an SSD, which sounded appealing to me. It had XLR recording directly to the camera, you know, 32-bit float, which means I wouldn't have to deal with the levels, you know, although I don't believe that, and that's like a whole nother video. But, you know, I come from a pro audio background, so I'm always going to make sure that my levels are correct. But it's pretty cool that you don't have to have an external audio device with the GH7. That was very appealing to me too. And I am somebody who shoots outside most of the time, but I shoot indoors a lot too. You know, I'm not covering a war. You know, I'm not risking my life shooting what I'm doing. So anyway, I thought this was the greatest review. You know, he was very, very clear and concise with why it was right for him without talking about any of the specs. You know, because he knows you already know all the specs. He knows that you've seen that review 50 million times. You've seen every great influencer do it. And one is better than the other. I mean, they're all amazing. So he just talked about why it's good for him in Ukraine in the middle of a war, risking his life, why this camera is the most reliable camera, putting out the best possible image that he could get for a camera that was that reliable for the price that he wanted to pay. Perfect. The best camera review ever. You know. And by the way, just as an aside, it made me think about the Panasonic 20-60 kit lens that I love for my full frame S5. But, you know, I find myself never using it indoors because it's a pain in the ass. Because it's not a fast enough lens for me to do what I want to do, whatever I want to do indoors. Like right now, this lens that I'm using is an f1.4 lens, so I could completely obliterate the background if I want to. Or, like right now, I'm shooting at f2.8. So I can get this background to look exactly how I want it to look. Like that Broadway sign is a little bit blurred out, so there's like, you know, a good kind of separation between me and the background, and I can control that. But the kit lens, the aperture is 3.5 to 5.6. And so it's not as flexible, you know. So as I move the focal length because it's a zoom lens, which is an advantage, I find myself, you know, dealing with a lens that's now slower, and I can't control the bokeh or the background blur or whatever you want to call it, the separation, and that's a pain in the ass. And that is kind of what the guy was talking about with the GH7. Like, there are limitations, you know, like if you're using a Micro Four Thirds camera and you want to get a certain kind of look, you know, you're going to have to buy much wider lenses to get the same look that you can get on a full frame camera. You know, like you're going to have, because for those who don't know, I know most of you do know, but for those who don't know, a Micro Four Thirds camera, there's a 2x crop. And so if you have a 24mm lens, it's a 48mm lens on that Micro Four Thirds. And so if you want a 24mm look on your Micro Four Thirds, you're going to have to buy a 12mm lens. And then the aperture is different than it would be on a full frame camera because you have to account for the crop. So f1.4 on a micro four thirds camera is really more equivalent to like 2.8 or 3.5 on a full frame camera. And so all of a sudden that look that you want, it's like, I guess if you work full time with your micro four thirds camera and you set yourself up with the lenses that work for you and you get used to it, then you probably get to the point where you could do exactly what you want to do. Because I get plenty of black background blur when I work with the GH5. You know, I've shot some amazing, beautiful footage with that camera, and I love to work with aperture. Like, you know, working with the composition like that for me, and working with the way I want the frame to look, the way I want to kind of paint the picture and have this part of the frame in focus and this part out of focus, like, that's really important to me. And I don't feel that I can't do that with the GH5, you know. But I think if I use the GH5 doing a feature film like I've done with the S5, I would then feel the limitation because I'm used to working with a full frame camera. And so I think you can do whatever you want to do with a micro four thirds camera. You just have to set yourself up with the right lenses, and then you'll get used to it, and that'll be your kit. Like, you'll get used to it, you'll master that tool, and it'll be a part of your body and your heart and your brain, and it won't make a difference. But I just really enjoyed that review. And I guess what I'm saying is, as much as I love the camera and filmmaking space, the photography space on YouTube, I find that most people are doing the same thing over and over and over again. You know what I mean? Like, they're just being redundant, you know? They're kind of derivative of one another, and it's just, it gets boring after a while, you know? And especially if you have stuff that you like I ain't trying to look at any camera reviews anymore because I love what I have. I don't feel want for anything, you know? And I basically only use my vintage lenses and my anamorphic lenses. You know, like if I'm not doing professional work, I often have the kit lens on the camera when I'm outside because it's fun and it's light and it's a great lens. It works really well. I have a filter on it. What is it? A Cinebloom filter by Moment, and it just takes the edge off that lens because it's really sharp, and so it kind of matches really well with my vintage lenses. But basically, I work with two focal lengths, 28 millimeters and 50 millimeters, 90% of the time. And when I'm working anamorphic, I have a 35 millimeter f1.8 APS-C anamorphic lens and a 75 millimeter f1.8 anamorphic. So those have a different crop equivalency as well. But it's not as big of a crop as the micro four thirds because APS-C is 1.5 times crop as opposed to 2 times. And also with anamorphic, it's different. Like 35 millimeter anamorphic is a 1.5 times crop, but then you have to divide that by the squeeze factor, which is 1.33. And so my 35 millimeter lens is kind of like a 40 millimeter lens equivalent when I'm shooting anamorphic. So anyway, I've kind of, moved away from the point of this whole video, but I love that review because, like if I'm somebody, say, shooting weddings, and I don't shoot weddings, but if I'm a wedding shooter and if I'm looking for a camera, I only want to watch reviews from people who are doing weddings. Like, I don't care what anybody else has to say. If I'm trying to shoot sports, like if I want to work for the NBA or the NFL or shoot high school sports or whatever, I only want to watch reviews from people who do that work. That's it. I don't want to hear from anybody else, I mean, if I'm a street photographer, then I want to see people who are doing street photography. But, like everybody does everything. And I think the thing that bothers me about the reviews is that they really only talk about the specs. And then they show you examples and they show you how sharp it is. And they do these dynamic range charts and all this kind of stuff. And they talk about autofocus all the time. And, watching this video from Ukraine, I just thought to myself, man, those videos, they ain't nothing compared to this. This is the shit right here. This is what I want to see. Even though I'm not working in a war, but this is a guy who like if I'm a documentary filmmaker, I'm buying a GH7 probably. Because after watching that review, I'm like, damn, that's the right tool for the job. And I'm sure there are plenty of cameras that would be great for documentaries. I personally think the Panasonic S5, what I have, would be awesome for documentaries, even though it's lacking in autofocus, but I don't know, maybe the S5 too, if it's built the same as the S5, I don't know if it is. This thing is like a tank. Like, I really put this camera through it when I shot my last feature film. I was like in the ocean in the middle of the winter, I was out in the woods, I was in the city, I was everywhere. I was in rain, I was in snow, I was in mud. This camera is a champion. And the GH7 is clearly a champion. It's surviving a war, you know, and it's beautiful footage, you know, he's getting beautiful footage. He's a professional filmmaker, you know, so he should get that. And again, I'll say it again, if you're not getting beautiful, amazing footage out of any camera that you have that's made in the last 8 years, you need to look in the mirror, you know, and do more work and master your tool and really learn about exposure and white balance and ISO settings and composition and composition and composition, depth of field, all of it, you know. Learn how to work with aperture and how that really makes the picture that you're creating, the image that you're creating special, because you're messing with the depth of field. You know, learn about foreground, learn about background, learn about all of it. Learn about what focal length is meaningful to you, that resonates with you, because, you know, we all see the world in different ways, you know what I mean? Like, to me, 28 millimeters is plenty wide, but to a lot of people, they don't even look at a 28 millimeter lens as a wide lens, you know? To me, 35 is wide, 28, 24 is starting to get too wide for me, and then 20, it's a little bit distorted, you know? Like, I love 28, and I love 50. And I also have a Helios 44-2 lens, which is a 58 millimeter lens, but to me, it's basically the same as my 50. It just looks different, you know? It's got different characteristics. It's perfectly imperfect, I like to say, but that's pretty much the same with all my lenses. So anyway, again, I'm going to leave a link in the description for the GH7 review in the Ukraine. So much respect to that guy, and you know, much respect to all the people that do these camera reviews. Like I said, they look amazing. I mean, they're crafted so well. You know, they look like Nike commercials. You know, they're just fantastic. But the power in watching a review who is doing the work that you want to do, and who, you know, like, go watch 2 or 3 reviews about all the specs if that's important to you. Like, get all the specs. Like, think about, how am I going to shoot? What am I doing? What's important to me? How much dynamic range do I need? Do I need a low light camera? Do I need micro four thirds? Might be better for me because I'm shooting wildlife or sports, you know, like, think about it, you know. But then search for people who are doing the work that you want to do and watch their reviews. And that's what should really affect your choice in, you know, purchasing something that, you know, is going to work for you. And the last thing I'll say is this, you know, and this is relevant to me, and it just shows you how good that review was about the GH7, that I was even thinking, like, damn, I would love to have that, you know, because the GH7, truthfully, is not even right for me, you know. I'm a full frame shooter the way I shoot what I do. And so I'm going to say this to end this video. When you finally land on a camera that you love, that works for you, that's doing the job, keep it until it just stops you from doing the work that you love to do. Like, learn that camera inside out, you know. Make that thing, like I said, a part of your body. Like, you know, make it your camera and nobody else's camera. Like, learn that thing inside out. Learn and, you know, figure out what lenses you need and keep them. And don't keep, you know, living on this hamster wheel of spinning around and trying to buy the newest camera every couple of months. It's not serving you well, and you're not learning anything, and it's keeping you from doing actual work. And you should think about that. Like, maybe you're so interested in all these different cameras and all this technology because you don't want to really commit to telling an actual story, to doing actual work, to being a photographer, to being a filmmaker. You know, maybe you're just not ready to commit to that, and so you just keep buying all this gear and having the latest and greatest equipment and the most, you know, the best computer and the best camera and the best lights and the best of everything, and then that's not good enough for you. So then you got to replace all that with the best, and you know, it's like, but what have you done? What are you doing? You know, like, it really should be all about the stories that you want to tell. You know, the thing that should excite you the most is the end game. You know, when you get to, like, maybe get accepted to a festival and see your work on a big screen, you know, or get it on a streaming service, or just share it with people, you know, like on the computer. That's what should get you excited. Just like when you're a musician, like all the instruments in the world, all the recording gear, it's all about the song when you're done, the music when you're finished, and you just sit back and you can listen to it. It should be the same thing with photography and filmmaking. So get something and stick with it, you know, commit to it. Become great at what you do, you know, become the best version of yourself and fall in love with what you have. And then when it stops you, get rid of it, because it's only a tool, it's only a piece of gear. It doesn't really mean anything. And the minute it stops working for you, it's not a person. You know what I mean? It's just a camera. Get rid of it, trade it in, and get the next thing that is not going to limit you. But really be honest with yourself. Like, what is really limiting you? You know what I mean? Because I'm going to tell you, you could get a GH5 for $500 and there's pretty much nothing about that camera that is going to be limiting you to doing anything other than autofocus. So if you spend, say, $1,500 and you get a Sony FX30, I mean, you should be able to keep that camera forever unless you feel like APS-C is suddenly stopping you from doing what you have to do. But my point is, if, you know, like for me, I have the Panasonic S5. I can't imagine what's going to make me want to upgrade this camera, but I'm sure the day will come. But I don't know why. You know, I don't know what's going to, maybe it's going to be something that somebody asks me to do that this camera can't do. Maybe somebody's going to say, we absolutely need to shoot in 8K or 6K, you know. Then I'll either have to get an external monitor to work with all the time, I don't know, or I'll have to upgrade, you know. I don't know. I don't know what would force me to, you know, maybe if somebody has me working with a bunch of other people and I have to be on set and this camera doesn't have the I/O that I would need to connect with other people, focus pullers, things like that. But there's really nothing about the camera itself and the image that it could put out, that it's able to put out, that is limiting to me in any way. I am generations away from maxing out this camera, you know, where I could say, oh, I'm too good for this camera. Like, I'm still learning so much. And I've shot 2 feature films and a bunch of other stuff. And I'm not even close to, you know, the best of me and the best of this camera. So bear that in mind. And that's all I got to say about that. Oh, please subscribe. Please hit the like button. Please join my Patreon if you feel that I'm worthy of that. And now I'm done, so I'll see you in a minute.